Hey folks, welcome again to Code to Cloud. We're gonna do a bit of a hybrid episode today. No pun in the title there, right? But literally, this will be going live out on our podcast as well as our YouTube channel. Because there's a bit of a show and tell. So we're going to be trying to be as descriptive as possible for the audio folks. Listen to this in their car, in their commute, on the train to work, flying on the aeroplane to some exotic location, right? Because you want to get your dose of Azure right in your life. But I am joined by another one of my esteemed colleagues today, Cobey, right? Who's going to talk to us about Azure Arc and the arc of the possible. My British puns here, but Cobey, do you just want to introduce yourself? Tell folks what you do.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as Kevin mentioned, colleague working at Microsoft. I'm a technical specialist working in Azure infrastructure, a deep focus on Azure Arc, or as we like to call it, our adaptive cloud offering. You'll hear around the industry the idea of hybrid cloud. Um, as we do in Microsoft, we always like to rebrand our stuff and be very cutting edge with our semantics. So yeah, so the adaptive cloud is the Arc journey. So, but a bit about me in my background. I may not have been the traditional Microsoft folks. Like I come from a background of operations, so very much a rack and stack server management type operations role that I've had in the past. I spent about, let's just say, 20 years of my career in the public service uh, in Canada, focused mostly around you know managing server rooms to policy to you name it across the federal public service. So that was me, and I just have to say when I saw Arc as an offering inside of Azure, it very much led me to like if I had that when I was managing multiple servers across distinct data centers with no connectivity, and I had to jump on, take a taxi or, you know, walk over to the other data center. And if I had Arc and that capability to manage those environments as a single pane of glass, that would have saved not only my back, but just in general the my time, right? So that's really where I fell in love with the arc of the possible, as Kevin put it.
I mean, Kobe's story is similar to mine. I was a data center monkey, right? Operations, racking and stacking. And most listeners have heard my tales of sleeping at the trolley at 2 a.m., right, doing firewall upgrades and all that good stuff. And there's no other smell really that I've encountered like a data center. But to your point, Kobe, as soon as I started playing around with Azure Arc, I think it was like a year ago, and I think I RDP'd into a Windows VM from the Azure portal, and I was like, I wish I'd have had these tools. Like we used to have to like buy 6 or 7 different tool sets to achieve the same thing, right? So
Exactly.
I'm just touching on like RDP, for instance, and folks are like, well, I said, believe it or not, it's one of the most important things, right, when it comes to server management. And for Linux servers, we had real VNC. Do you remember that, right? Like that little,
Yeah, that
yeah,
was that was
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was interesting, right? And it wasn't stable, right? Anyway, from my experience, but like you couldn't get the heartbeat due to connectivity issues, or if it was air gapped, or like simple stuff like reporting back on patching and compliance required a team. There was so many pain points, even on loading software onto a VM,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to steal your thunder because I mean I like what we've done with it because like my PTSD sort of gets mitigated when we go through the tool set, right? For those ops guys and girls. But yeah, do you just want to kick us off with it? And
Yeah, absolutely. So I know in the scope, like I want to just explain to your listeners around what the adaptive cloud journey is. I'm going to just speak to it in general, but what we're really treating Azure Arc is that single pane of glass to meet our customers where they are. So whether it be Kubernetes on-prem, whether it be your actual server infrastructure, your IoT devices, even other hyperscalers. So as long as those machines have IP connectivity to Azure, that's where we will meet you, right? As long as that. So, you know, that is the bread and butter of what Azure Arc is. So it's a single pane of glass for all your infrastructure, no matter where it is. We adapt to where your infrastructure is. So that I didn't want to get into like a whole PowerPoint slide and connectivity and everything. So like I can jump right into the portal, and that's absolutely fine. And let me
Pop that
just
pop that portal open, right? And
right.
as always, we didn't test to see if the screen share functionality worked before we
That's all
started
right.
recording.
I want
Let's see if this is gonna work.
see it. So you'll probably see.
Could you just zoom in for folks?
Yep. Just give me a second here.
I've done that before. I recorded an entire video. Thought it was some of my best work, and it looked great on my screen, but nobody else's.
Tell me when that's
Just a
not
little bit
working.
more, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
So I hope your listeners are aware of what the Azure portal is. So I'm not going to go into that too extensively, but this is it. So we have the Azure Arc blade here. I'm just really going to focus today around Azure Arc connected servers. So I think we could go into a whole deep dive in Azure Local, Kubernetes clusters, VMware, vCenter connected. But I think for the scope of this, I'm just going to focus around the server management of Azure Arc. So when you come into Azure Arc here, you'll see we have many different blades. So like I mentioned, Azure Local, VMware, SSCM VMs. So when I talk about machines, so I'll go in here. Hopefully, a lot of our customers have way more than, say, 5 VMs, but in my lab environment, that's what we have, right? So I've already went ahead and actually some of our folks in the Azure community, the Azure Arc community, have created a great samples for customers just to try out Arc. It's called Arc Box or Arc Jumpstart, which you can actually deploy inside of your Azure tenant without impacting any of your on-prem infrastructure. Because I know that's always a concern of some folks about, well, I want to try out Arc and what its functionality has, but I don't want to impact my current environment until I'm fully prepared to do so. That's where the Jumpstart toolbox comes in handy. So they have a Jumpstart for IT pros, Jumpstart for DevOps, and some other flavors of those as well. So first and foremost, I just want to go through the idea of, well, okay, so if a customer were to come in here, they aren't Arc enabled, they would see nothing here. So how would they onboard their current estate, right? That's where I would come here and show. This is ClickOps. I understand, not necessarily the cloud to code to cloud type audience that we were content, but still there is an end state here once they Azure Arc enable all their machines.
I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about that, Cobey, because there's some scripts coming up, right? So we still get our fix.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm very much a PowerShell jockey and CLI jockey, so this is right up my alley, right? So when you add servers to Azure Arc, you have multiple ways of doing that. Obviously, you can deploy a single server with a script. You can add multiple servers, so that would be deploying it through a GPO, through any automations to multiple machines. Really what that is doing is deploying at scale. The really neat thing here is you can see that we can add servers from AWS. So we have our AWS connector, which will actually automatically ingest your AWS EC2 instances and onboard them to Arc. if you so choose. So that's done through a CloudFormation template. And then Azure, anything that adds servers from update management as well. But I'm just going to go through and just show you the simple interface to actually generate that script. So hopefully the live demo gods are good to me today.
Connectivity's up, right?
If not, I have a backup. So when you are actually connecting Azure Arc, I think this is key and a message that I give to most of my customers as well. This is not I'm migrating the machine to Arc. It's merely extending the management plane of Azure to those machines, right?
Okay.
So I say two, but in reality, it's those Arc agents that are communicating with the Azure management plane. Okay.
So are they similar to, anybody's done migrations of VMs in Azure before? You have to onboard the agent, right, in Azure for it to integrate with the operating system, the heartbeat, perf metrics. Is that similar to what we're doing here?
Exactly. Right. So when you see when I'm done this, like, let me just go ahead. So you obviously have to pick a subscription, a resource group where those stubs of those Azure Arc machines would reside. So I'll just pick, it doesn't really matter. This is my Azure Arc IT Pros. You select a region. So depending on data sovereignty issues or concerns, you can actually have those Azure Arc agents deployed to, or sorry, the agents reporting to a specific region. So in my area would be Canada Central.
Oh, Canada, right?
Oh, Canada. So then it's up to you to select whether this is also supported on Windows and Linux, and many different flavors of Linux and many different flavors of Windows. This also, I should mention this as well. Under Windows, it is supported on client OSs, but we really suggest when it's a end user productivity device that you use our standard, Microsoft Configuration Management or Intune. The reason why we include some of those client OSs like Windows 11 is because in some of our customers, they have point of sale machines or other type of functioning machines on there.
Okay.
So that's why we include those there. It's not recommended to do it for end user productivity machines because there could have a potential of a long period of time where those machines are not connected. So that's one thing I'll mention there.
I was going to ask that, right? Because I was like, what? Like, you really need to have a word of yourself, right? If you're running a enterprise workload on a client operating system, I've seen it done, right?
Right.
But yeah, that point of sales scenario, retail scenarios, that kind of thing, or industrial scenarios, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So I'm going to just go, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to set them to Windows. So it'll generate, if I did Linux, it would generate a bash script. If I did Windows, it generates a PowerShell script. So just different flavors of how these get deployed. And then connectivity. I mentioned, I won't talk about connectivity, but here we go. So the agent actually has multiple ways of connecting to Azure, the Azure management plane. Public endpoint, so all over an encrypted channel directly to Azure. So those would be public URLs that the agent would then talk to. A proxy server, very similar. It's just routing traffic through that proxy, or private endpoint through your ExpressRoute or VPN service. So those are the three connectivity methods that we have available to us. So hopefully I have a service principal that I can just not create one. Okay, I'll just create one. This is where it could, because I haven't. Okay, so let me just do one thing. I'm just going to go back here. So this is where the live demo gods, because I haven't PIMmed up to global administrator to create a service principal. So let me just see, I can I can relate here. So let's just do this and just do it for a single server. That makes it easier.
Love your OPSEC though, Kobe.
Yeah, yeah. So
Privilege and
if we,
identity management right there.
yep.
Also known as run as.
So here's another piece that we include in Arc, right? So um, by default, when a machine is onboarded to Arc, you can take advantage of the tagging capabilities inside of Azure, RBAC capabilities in Azure, that unified experience directly in Azure. So hypothetically, customer has multiple data centers in multiple cities, multiple states or provinces, multiple countries. Here's where they can actually define some of those tags, and it will be embedded into that script. So if I wanted to say data center, I don't know, I'm in Ottawa, so I'll say Ottawa, and it's the Ottawa data center, and then Ontario, ignore those things, and Canada, right? So this is actually, and when you create this script, it can be manipulated as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create that.
Look at that. Beautiful. Generates it for you.
So it generates it for you. So at this point, I have not created any Azure resources. All I have done is created the script for me to run on my individual machines. The first step that failed, unfortunately, was around creating a service principal so that it could be done in an automatic at scale fashion. In this case, I would be actually logging in with my credentials, assuming I have the right RBAC privileges, and I'm able to onboard a machine directly into Azure. Okay, so from here, you would just copy or download this script and then run it on the individual machines that you see fit. From there, once that is all completed and said and done, I can close this off. If you want to go through this script, though, actually that's one good thing. So you can see here, we set some of these parameters. Just ignore the subscription ID; it's probably going to be killed by the time there, so I should probably redact that. But in general, that this subscription is going to be removed. So in general, all I would have to do if I wanted to add these to a separate subscription, separate resource group, what have you, I could just manipulate these parameter values, and it would be published into the Azure Arc resource would be published into that subscription, that resource group, etc. Right. So the scripts are very generic in the fact that what they're doing is downloading the agent directly from our aka.ms download link, and then configuring the agent on the source box with these parameters. Okay. So then when this is said and done and installed on the actual machine, cancel this. Oops, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. There we go. So they would show up directly in Azure as machines in stubs of themselves inside of Azure. So yes, Kev, did you have a question?
I did, right? And
Yes.
it was on about the onboarding a little bit because
Okay.
I've had fun and games. I wouldn't say fun and games, but I was testing out a couple of Linux boxes, and there's some dependencies like Azure CLI needs to be installed, right, for the authentication piece. Unless there's an automated way of doing that, right? But apart from that, there's nothing else required. Like everything else is like to your point, it's pretty much automated, right? So.
Pretty much. The one thing I did not mention, and thank you for bringing that up, is some of the prerequisites, right? So there are some resource providers that need to be registered in the subscription.
See, I missed that as well. That's why it's good having two people.
Right. So there are some prerequisites. Obviously, it has to be within one of the supported OSs inside of our documentation as well. But yeah, so the resource providers have to be created, have to be registered inside. So that's Microsoft hybrid compute, hybrid connectivity, and I had the notes. Yeah, and the Arc data as well. So those were the main ones that needed to be there. So yeah, it's Microsoft.hybrid compute, Microsoft.guest configuration, Microsoft.hybrid connectivity, and then Microsoft.Azure Arc data. And that's for our Azure Arc enabled SQL servers.
Okay.
Okay. So those are the main ones that need to be there, and Microsoft.compute, but I would hope
Should be
most of
switched on, right? By
should be
now, hopefully. Right?
in theory, yeah. So that's needed for some features such as Azure Update Management and the extension upgrades, right? So
Okay.
that's what needs to be put in there.
Awesome.
So now you have a machine in Azure. What now, right? In reality, so okay, so I have a machine. So you say, oh, Cobey, so what now? What do I do? Right? So the way that we actually, so you could leave it as is and treat Azure as your CMDB, and there are some, you know, active services that you can run. You can actually run resource graph queries on your resources in Azure. You could see, I'll just click on one of these here so you can see.
I love this bit, by the way.
Yeah.
When the data starts trickling through.
So my data will be coming through. I'll talk to this while it loads. But in general, the metadata will be there, so you can actually query at scale across all your data centers. So you can see here, it'll bring in some of the metadata around this box. So you can see the operating system version, the FQDN that it resides, all the agent versions. A lot of the metadata that is being populated through the Arc agent will be there. So any of this data can be queried at scale. So I could say, and I'm going to show some dashboards in a second, but in general, you could actually pull in that data, run dashboards, throw them in a Power BI, visualize the heck out of it. You can do whatever you want, slice and dice it how you see fit, depending on the requirements or the what the needs of the end user. So absolutely super flexible, can run some resource graph queries directly in VS Code if you wanted to pull in that data and then manipulate those as well. So there's some really neat things you can do inside of the command line that I'm hoping I can get to. So
So
yes,
quick question.
yes,
Sorry to keep interrupting, but
no, that's all right.
this
That's fine.
this was all pulled directly off the box, right, from the agent. So it
Exactly.
starts querying the operating system, right, the configuration on there. What I really like at the bottom there, I've been asked this question a million times. It tells you the license type. I mean, that's pretty.
Exactly.
Anyone's ever been for an audit or procurement want to know how many different types of licensing we've got? There you go, right on the screen.
And that brings up a good point, Kevin. So a lot of folks are using Arc as a mechanism for, old tech debt, extended security updates. So that is an option as well through Arc, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
I won't go into that too much, but in general, a traditional if you bought extended security updates, they would be purchased for a year basis. With Arc, the benefit to customers is that the fact that it's done as a pay go model. So
Right.
as you upgrade, as you migrate, as you decommission those boxes, that cost to a customer would go down. So the license is purchased on a monthly basis. So that's something that I think is advantageous to a lot of customers, and they may have tech debt that for whatever business reasons they can't upgrade, they can't decommission, whatever the case may be. They can use Arc as a way of giving them that extra runway, so to speak, to migrate, modernize, decommission, whatever the case may be. And then when they do that, that 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 cost actually goes away. So which is a significant savings to a lot of customers.
I agree. It's like you sort of increasing the visibility of those resources that maybe have been forgotten about, right? Because they're on
Mm-hmm.
premise. And
Exactly.
let's be honest, like a lot of people are in the cloud, right? The maturity level's pretty high now, and the stuff that is on-prem is either the stuff that's hard to move or needs to be re-architected. There's so many different use cases, right? But or it's just a regulatory thing, right? So
Exactly.
I really like the idea of this is like highlighting the visibility, but in a modern way, right? Like I'm using my cloud platform for everything else, but I can pull out the basic information.
Yeah. So the fact that, customers are already in Azure, they're already using some of these functionalities. We're extending the same functions that they would have for native Azure VMs directly to their on-prem. So we're being adaptive. We bring back that adaptive cloud uh, idea. Is that we have two machines. They're pretty much treated the exact same in terms of the infrastructure world. One being on-prem, one being in Azure. Why not use the same plane to manage both environments? That's the beauty of Arc, right?
Awesome.
So that being said, well, what type of features are we talking about here, right? What actually can I extend to my Azure environment, or from my Azure environment, sorry, to on-prem? So if I go into I'll just go to this Windows box, for example. And I'm not used to scrolling, but I know that this is, so we talk about updates, right? So Azure natively has Azure Update Manager, which actually can be extended to these boxes inside of your on-premise data center, another hypervisor. Again, like I said, if it has IP connectivity, it is available to be Azure Arc enabled. So you can see here updates. I'm just going to quickly go through some of these scenarios here. So I can go ahead and see, all right, I have 4 updates on this actual machine. I can go ahead and kick off a patch schedule automatic, like a one-time update right now, right? I could do it at scale too. So in theory, I could say, create a patch schedule for all my machines across my entire estate, whether they be in Azure, whether they be on-prem. As long as they're connected to the Azure management plane in some way, I can kick off a maintenance schedule for them. And then code to cloud. Yes, there are Terraform. You can apply this through Terraform, Bicep, or ARM. That is all available. So that is something to be aware of. So
I'm a fan of Azure Update. I came from a system center world, and that is, unless you've got a big team, that takes a lot of tender loving care, right, to keep going. Whereas this is quite simple, and to your point, like invoking a one-time patch, those 0 days come out and there's an emergency patch, boom, and then you can audit back on it, right? Which I think you're about
right,
to show here. So
yeah, I can actually see. So all of this metrics, or all this telemetry, I could query at scale through through log analytics exactly which machine. So say if there's a 0 day, I want to know which machines do not have that patch, and patch those machines. So I could create dynamic scopes for those machines, right? So I can say, give me all the machines that do not have this KB, for example. And then I'm going to dynamically deploy that patch to all of my estate at scale, right?
awesome. I mean, I've been there.
Yeah.
RDPing onto every box possible to try and kick off Windows Update, right?
A nightmare.
Absolutely nightmare, right? Because you're trying to do it
Absolute nightmare.
as fast as possible, right? So
That's just one functionality here. So I want to, in general, you can create dynamics. So this is again where that tagging comes into play, right? So I wanted to bring it back to the tagging ability. So you're creating dynamic scopes. I'm going to say, I only want to tag my Ottawa data. I only want to upgrade my Ottawa data centers, right? Or there may be a specific business reason why you might want to do that. It's kind of a odd statement, but in general, like say my Ottawa data center has a different patch schedule than, say, I don't know, the Calgary data center, or Toronto, or whatever the case may be. But you could actually create dynamic scopes. So as soon as you deploy and instantiate an Arc machine, it would be automatically included in that patch schedule,
Okay.
which is phenomenal, because there's no manual intervention. I say anything that's manual is a bug and you should not do it, right? So anything you can automate makes it that much better. Okay. So I'm going to go back on to, some of these other services that are available through. And I skipped over this. How are they made available? That's one thing that I should have mentioned. So let me get back to this. So if I go back into this box here, you'll see extensions. So Azure Arc itself gets deployed on the machine. Every additional service that is deployed or instantiated on an Arc machine is deployed through an extension through Azure Arc. So I'm deploying Azure Update Manager, it's an extension. I am deploying AMA, it's an extension on that Azure Arc machine. I'm deploying policy, which is guest configuration. I always like to refer to it as the GPOs for the cloud, but I get
it.
Yeah,
That's completely relatable, right? Yeah.
Right. So it's all deployed with extensions. Okay. So let me go into some of these here. So like I said, enable additional monitoring capabilities. So you have monitoring capabilities with log analytics, monitoring insights. So that's when you're talking about System Center and SCOM and the like. This is really your performance metrics that you're gathering. So it's all getting ingested into. I'll just click on this because show performance in this box.
That screen always throws me off because it originally used to mean that it wasn't set up.
That's right.
I don't know why it's there, right? But yeah.
So the reason why I have no metrics is because I shut my machines off daily. But in theory, because I like to think about cost savings for myself. But in general, like, I want to make sure that this is clear. So the metrics are actually getting ingested into log analytics, and you can query on this. So like a standard operating, like when I was operating multiple machines for my former employer, some of the metrics that I would want to see is, like, is my drives getting full, or my CPU pegged, or whatever the case may be. You can actually create alerts, which could come in the form, alerts, and then they instantiate action groups in Azure, which could be an email, could be a text, could be a webhook to do an automation of some sort, right? It could be anything that you see that, depending on the requirements, could do like anything, really. So when I think about, it's going to look bad on me, but sometimes the traditional operator would be like, oh, the CPU is pegged for this service that is not available to the public. I'm just going to reboot it, right? Like that's a horrible way of doing things, but I'm going to make sure that it's
the quickest way of dealing with something.
Sometimes it's the quickest way. I would inevitably want to find out what the root cause was, but in the effort of explaining how something would work, okay, CPU gets pegged on this machine. I get an alert. Log Analytics says this machine has been pegged with high CPU utilization. I'm going to kick off an automation that is actually going to go in, log into that box, and reboot it. So in theory, that could happen, right? So automation is a wonderful thing. It's also a scary thing. But in this case, I would say that would be, some sort of use case that you could actually develop, right? Okay. So I'm sorry that my metrics are not showing here, but I just brought it up this morning. But you would see actually the graphs and the perfmon ability in here.
very similar to the way we would look at virtual machines in Azure, right? So
Exactly. Same thing. Same things.
I'm seeing the same icons, the same layouts. It's all familiar tool sets, right?
All familiar. Exactly. So go back into this box again. So policies. So you can actually enable guest policies on the OS. So
Mhm.
where I see this happening is more about checking for compliance at scale across your environment, right? So I don't know, say your PowerShell execution policy is set to unrestricted and you don't want that being done on your Windows machines. Well, you can check either you can remediate those issues, or you can just audit on those two for the end user to actually make sure they're compliant. So for just for compliance purposes, I can see, all right, well, they have their execution policy set to unrestricted. Why is that? Okay, well, then you approach or you create a ticket through your ticketing system directly to those clients. Those that can be some automations that you would set up, right? Um, change tracking and inventory. So coming back to that root cause analysis for some of our customers and some of those servers, I can actually go in here. I'm going to go into this box, and I haven't changed this box in a while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my time span to be 30 days. There you go.
Oh
So
wow.
you can actually see, in this case, what's been changed from a Windows service capability, as well as some of the events. I don't have any events, but you can actually go ahead and see exactly what has changed, what has been installed. Like in this case, it's mostly Windows services, but if I installed a program or I shut down a service or I modified a service, it would actually be indicated here. So doing that root cause analysis through this tooling, or even just understanding what software is out there on my estate, right? Like you may see some 0-day security issues with, I don't know, let's like Adobe, or I don't know, something. I shouldn't say names, but like some piece of software, right? Where it needs to be patched or it's using legacy type things. You can actually use change in inventory tracking to know exactly what is installed on each one of those machines, or which machines has that installed, so you can go and remediate those.
That's awesome because, again, going back to the security conversation, um, if you're trying to patch a piece of software and report it back to your cybersecurity teams, they love a metric, right? They love a report, right? They want to see progress to, obviously, for the CISO or whoever's in charge, right, to deliver that back to the board. So
Exactly.
this is just going to make life easier, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So um, I'm going to skip over a lot. So what I'm going to go is go through the rest of those very rapidly because I want to get down to actually showing some really cool things we're seeing in the portal right now. Let's go back to this overview while that loads up. So you can actually, one thing I was mentioning too, you can actually deploy Defender and actually see your security vulnerabilities as well. So Microsoft Defender actually can be deployed to these machines via Azure Arc. Azure Arc being the control plane, that single pane of glass. So I can actually enable, if I so choose, to deploy Defender at scale to all of these machines, right? So then I would be able to go into my security dashboard for this machine, which I have enabled already, and I can see the recommendations outlined from Defender on what should be, like, as we mentioned before, Azure Update Manager. It's not patched, so you should be patching it on a regular basis. So there that gives you an explanation. So it just gives you an overview of the security recommendations based on Microsoft best practices that should be either implemented or remediated on that box. Okay.
Just time check, Kobe, because
Yep. Yep.
I have an important meeting on the hour. We've got 10 minutes left.
Okay. So 10 minutes. I want to show some really, really neat things, and then I'm going to So you were talking about RDPing into boxes,
Well,
right?
yeah, basic, sysadmin stuff, right?
Basic sysadmin stuff. And I know this is probably going to be small for people, so I'm going to make this really, really, really small, really, really big. I mean,
Keep
can't
going.
wait.
Keep going.
Okay.
Perfect. I know,
Ugh.
right?
Okay. So right now I'm sitting in my terminal. Can I expand these to make this look a little bit better? Yeah, it's a little bit better. Okay. So I'm sitting here in my terminal. I want to connect to an Azure Arc machine. I'm sitting on my desk. I don't have connectivity to these machines. And what do? Okay, so quickly. So through the Azure CLI, I can actually SSH to a box directly through the Azure management plane. So you'll see here, I'm going to jump. So I am sitting on my Azure Arc enabled machine. I did that very rapidly, but there is CLI. You can do it directly through the CLI and actually SSH into the box. So now I'm on the box and I can incorporate this into my CI/CD pipelines, right? So if I need to do any manipulation on, say, a worker, whatever the case may be, I can do that directly in my pipelines now without needing exposing a public IP, without exposing any VPN connections. So this is protected all by the Azure management plane, and I'm actually connecting directly to that box. Well, through the management plane, but I'm connecting to that box and able to run commands on it.
That's awesome. That was pretty quick as well.
Yeah,
So can I use Entra ID kind of stuff as well?
absolutely you can as well. You can absolutely use Entra ID as well to connect directly to the box. Right here for the purposes of demo,
I get that. Yeah.
obviously I've used Entra to log into my CLI, and then I'm SSHing using local permissions. You can also use SSH keys. Like it's all configurable, but I just did for demo purpose and ease of use. Not the most secure way of doing it, obviously, but
But
I've
it's a
actually
demo. It's a demo,
it's a
right?
demo. Yeah, exactly. You
It's
can do
the
the same. Yeah, you can do the same thing for Windows as well. Like that's
because like what I'm thinking there is, a lot of customers have invested heavily right into their IDP, right? Entra,
mhm,
also known as Azure AD to the old school folks, right? But yeah, like then conditional access policies, MFA, location restrictions. You basically notching up the access layer, right? To I'm not going to say legacy, right? But
that's right.
like security on cloud is light years ahead, right? In some scenarios compared to what we did on prem, right? So you're sort of wrapping it all around that as well. That's what I quite like about that.
That's right. Like I was akin to like the castle moat mentality
Yeah, yeah.
of an on-prem infrastructure. Like I have my castle and it's protected by a moat. Well, yeah, but I can dig underneath the moat, I can go around the moat. So the idea Entra actually encapsulates that castle, right? So that's that it being your entire, like we're talking about security at every layer. Um, Entra is just a part of that puzzle. So
Awesome.
yeah, and just one thing before we go, and I talked about some dashboards and the like, right? So I can actually go ahead and look at in my entire inventory. These are all done with resource graphs, so you can actually look at your entire estate and this is all visualized. You can visualize it Power BI, but in Azure, there's simple dashboards all done, all powered by resource graph queries. I can look at all my cores of my machines. I can look at different OS types. I can slice and dice this as you see fit. I can actually see, different OS types, what's available there. And yeah, so all extensible through resource graph queries and visualizations. Very powerful. Just as you're looking at a CISO or some sort of they don't really care about the details. They may just want
No,
to see an abstract view, right? They want to see an abstract view of my estate. This is where that would come into play. So just another piece of the Arc puzzle is that, all right, now I can see my entire estate in one single pane of glass through resource graph queries, Power BI, whatever visualization you see fit. Pull that out, throw it into Excel for all that matters. I wouldn't advocate for that, but anyways, it's a capability as well.
that's awesome. This has been a really great session. I feel like we could spend another 2 to 3 hours on this, right? To be quite frank. So if folks want to see more of this, then either get in touch with myself or Cobey, right? And maybe we do a Ask Me Anything session, right? And we'll go through this
Exactly.
a bit deeper, right? We're just trying to give folks a bit of a taste. I again, retouching the point I was making, you know, I like the fact that we're trying to bring those Azure cloud native approaches to existing infrastructure, and it's pretty low touch. That's what I really like about this,
Exactly.
from a management point of view, because we're consolidating everything. And to be quite honest, getting folks to relearn stuff all the time is a massive overhead on an organization, right? So if I can just do it all through the Azure portal, then
Yep.
one tool to rule them all, right? Pretty much. But yeah,
Exactly. And like this, like our Azure environment is constantly evolving as well. So, you know, come talk to me in another 6 months and we may have a different demo altogether. Who knows, right? So it just a constantly changing world and evolving. Um, and I like where it's going anyways. So
maybe we'll do a session on my favorite subject, which is Kubernetes clusters, right? And how they're enabled for the next one.
exactly.
So yeah, any final thoughts, Cobey? I mean, we'll signpost people to some of the resources that we've mentioned today, right, in the show notes. But is there any parting wisdom, right? I want to go into our quick fire round, which I ask
Right.
everybody, right?
Sure.
But yeah, is
Sure.
there any parting words that you have around Arc for folks? You mentioned the jumpstart stuff, right? But
Right. So yeah, look at the jumpstart. Just to, as I say, dip your toes in the water of Azure Arc. What it does, it just deploys a Hyper-V instance in Azure. Um, Azure Arc obviously isn't supported on Azure itself. I'm sure you'll find there's ways to hack that, but in general, yeah. So that's what it is doing. It's creating a simple Hyper-V. Try it out. Deploy the extensions. And see how it fits. Like I'm a strong proponent for it. I think it's something that a lot of customers would benefit from. So yeah, that's all I can say.
awesome. Right, we're gonna get into the quick fire round, right? This is the more comedic end of the session. So
It's
I think,
scaring me a little bit.
well, we
It's
talked
scaring me a
about
little bit.
this. We were on a trip recently, and we talked about this, right? So, favorite games console.
Oh well, I have to say Xbox because that was my last one. I gotta say that was my last owned console myself. My young sons have different opinions, and that's
Okay.
their own. Good story about that though. Actually, before my son was born, so I'm gonna say Xbox was my last console that I owned personally. I'd say it was probably 2 days before my first son was born, and as you would probably
I remember
uh,
the story now, right?
the red ring of death happened 3 days before my son was born. 2 or 3 days goes so far. The red ring of death. So I'm like, all right, I guess that's enough of that. So in general, that was my last purchase console myself. But yeah, I'd say Xbox for sure. Yeah.
On a side note to that, talking about when worlds collide, right? Forza 5 is on the PlayStation Store, and you can actually be able to play Forza on a PlayStation. right? So
Yeah.
this is massive news, by the way. If you're a gamer such as myself, right? So more games to more people, right? Which is always a good
Well,
story.
well,
Yeah,
that's a good thing because as we talked about previously, my son has the steering wheel like you do,
yeah,
and
same here,
he's
right?
right. So he's all set up. So he'd probably be excited about Forza being in the PlayStation Store.
I love Forza. Developed in the UK as well. So yeah, bit of side note. Okay,
Hmm.
so favorite operating system of all time. And don't say Windows 11. I know it's great, right? But like, we've had a lot of opinions around this. Sometimes it's been your first love, right? First time you turned on a computer, or one that you maybe had the most pain with. It can be anything.
Oh, I could go back to my engineering. Like it's a pain, but it was one of these learning experiences. It was literally a dumb terminal. And I used to run assembly code on it to actually this sounds horrible. It was painful, but
Green
it was a
screen.
learning. Oh, we had an assembly code and we had to use a dip switches and we had to program for the bounce in a dip switch. And it
What's a
was
dip
one of
switch?
those, you know what a dip switch is? Like a mechanical switch, a mechanical switch. So we had like, as most people think, it's on and off. It's binary, but no, it's on off on off on off on off. So we actually had to pro. This isn't really an operating system, but we're actually developing an operating
It's good.
system
It's
for
all good. Good for it.
right, right. So in general, like it was one of those things, and I don't know if I'm very dating myself when I'm talking about assembly programming, but in general, you had to it was a fight when we went into engineering. It was a fight to get that same exact terminal because you're programming for that terminal because the bounce in the switches
Right.
differed from terminal to terminal. So I think I got your question, but it was way of me getting around
I,
actually saying what my favorite OS is, but writing my own OS for a simple machine that had dip switches and lights, and you actually had to program for it. And I still remember my assembly programming teacher said said to us, he goes, "If you put busy waiting loops in your assembly code, you fail." I'm like, it scared me, right? So it was one of those things, like if you do busy waiting loops, well, you got to trigger on the events, and that was the whole idea. And like I spent oh I'm getting PTSD thinking about it, but I spent like a single project that was worth maybe 1-2% of my entire grade. You'd spend 40 hours in the lab. No social life in engineering, by the way, at that time. It was like 40 hours in a lab looking at lights, twinkly lights, and bounces and switches. So like you can imagine my dreams. It's like a mechanical switch bouncing through my head and like lights twinkling. So
that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
We've not had someone come on before saying, "Well, when I was designing or building an operating system for a simple operation." So absolutely
yeah,
amazing story.
yeah.
Okay, awesome. Right. Well, thank you very much, Kobe. Where can people
Well, thank
find
you.
you? You're on LinkedIn, I think, right? Like
I am on LinkedIn. Yes, LinkedIn. So Cobey Errett on LinkedIn. So you can reach out to me there. Um, yeah, that's basically it.
awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, and as always, thanks to our listeners. And we'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye for
Thank
now.
you. Bye.